The rain had been falling since 5 in the afternoon, steady and indifferent, the kind of Friday rain that made the city feel smaller and meaner than it actually was. Inside the emergency department of Mercy General, the fluorescent lights buzzed at a frequency nobody consciously heard, but everyone unconsciously felt a low, relentless hum that lived just below the threshold of annoyance and well above the threshold of peace. Nurse Carrie Weston moved through the department the way experienced ER nurses always moved, economically, without wasted motion, her sneakers squeaking only slightly on the linoleum as she transferred a chart from one bay to another. She was 32 years old, 5 to 6, with light brown hair she kept in a low bun that was perpetually on the edge of coming loose. Her scrubs were standard-issue slate blue. Her badge read Weston, C. RN in the same laminated font as every other badge in the building. Nothing about her announced itself. She had worked the night shift at Mercy General for 4 years, and in that time she had become something that very few people managed to become in a busy urban emergency room: invisible. Not ignored, she was too competent for that, too precise, too reliably present, but invisible in the way that a load-bearing wall is invisible. You don't notice it, you just depend on it. Weston, Dr. Nathan Caulfield's voice had the particular flatness of a man who had cultivated condescension into an art form. He was 41, board-certified, and deeply convinced that nursing staff existed primarily to carry out decisions he'd already made. He came through the bay with a tablet tucked under one arm and a coffee he hadn't offered to share. Bay 6 needs a new IV line. The last one blew. I'm aware, Carrie said. I'm on my way there now. Caulfield glanced at her the way you glance at an unremarkable piece of furniture. Also, Bed 12 has been asking for someone to explain the discharge instructions. Can you delegate that? I'll handle it personally. He walked on without acknowledging her answer. Carrie watched him go for exactly 1 second, the same 1 second she allowed herself every time, and then she turned back to her work. Across the nurse's station, Lily Tran, 24, 8 months on the job, still operating on a mixture of genuine enthusiasm and controlled terror, caught Carrie's eye and winced sympathetically. Carrie gave her a look that meant, don't waste the energy. Lily Tran had been watching Carrie Weston for all 8 of those months, with the quiet intensity of someone trying to understand a language they could hear, but not quite parse. It wasn't admiration exactly, it was something more precise than that. It was the recognition that this woman, this unremarkable-seeming woman with the perpetually loose bun, was operating on a different frequency than everyone else in the building. She never fumbled, she never hesitated, she never made a decision twice when once was sufficient. She could start an IV line in the dark. Lily had actually seen her do something close to this, under terrible lighting in a trauma bay with a combative patient, and her hands never shook. Except for one thing. Lily had noticed it 3 months ago and had been cataloging instances since. Whenever a helicopter landed on the roof, Carrie Weston's hands went still for exactly 2 or 3 seconds before resuming whatever they had been doing. Not a tremor, a suspension, like a program encountering an unexpected input and pausing to process it. And she'd seen her, twice now, stop what she was doing when the television above the waiting room chairs landed on a news segment about overseas operations. Both times, Carrie had stood very still for a moment and then very deliberately looked away, not with distaste or sorrow, with something harder to name, something that looked almost like recognition. But Lily was 24, and she had learned quickly that in an emergency room, you did not ask questions you weren't prepared to receive answers to. At 11:42 p.m., the rain intensified. Carrie was in Bay 4, doing a dressing change on a man who had managed to lacerate his forearm on a broken storm drain. He was 61, a retired postal worker named Dennis who was talking steadily about his daughter's upcoming wedding and trying not to look at what Carrie was doing to his arm. You've done this before, he said, not as a question. A few times, Carrie said. You're very calm. He meant it as a compliment, she could tell. People in ER bays said it often, as though calmness were unusual, as though the baseline state of a human being was not calm, but rather something edged and precarious. It's a useful quality in this line of work, she said. Dennis nodded and went back to talking about the wedding flowers. Carrie finished the dressing. She assessed the wound margins, adjusted the pressure, noted the time. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. The helicopter on the roof had taken off 20 minutes ago, a respiratory transfer, not military. She had determined by the sound of the rotors almost before it was conscious thought, and her hands had resumed their steadiness in approximately the time it took to draw a breath. She was always waiting for something. She had been waiting for 4 years. She just didn't know anymore whether she was waiting for it to find her or for herself to stop expecting it. At 11:58 p.m., the ambulance bay doors opened. Not the pedestrian entrance, not the family waiting area, the ambulance bay doors, which required a key card and a purpose. They opened with the pneumatic hiss of a system designed for urgency. And into the ER came something that had not been expected, had not been called ahead for, and had not arrived by ambulance. There were 6 of them. 5 were being supported, one way or another. 2 were upright but moving with the careful deliberateness of men who had trained themselves to move normally under conditions that would floor most people. 1 was between 2 others, his left leg bearing no weight. 1 was on a gurney they had wheeled themselves from somewhere, and he was the one whose condition was the most immediately visible. Gray-faced, jaw set, both hands pressed to his right side with a pressure that communicated exactly how serious the bleeding was. The 6th man was unhurt. He was perhaps 45, built with the economical density of someone who had never stopped training for something, and he moved with the facility of a man for whom every room was a tactical assessment to be completed before anything else. He did not hurry. He did not defer to the space. He walked into the ER the way people walk into places they already understand. His name, though no one in the ER knew it yet, was Marcus Doyle. He wore civilian clothing, dark tactical pants, a jacket that had seen better days, boots that had dried mud on them from somewhere that was not this city. He carried no weapon visibly. He scanned the room in approximately 2 seconds and then stood still, which was in some ways more alarming than if he had continued moving. Everyone stop. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It had the quality of a voice that had spent years being heard in conditions where not being heard meant people died. We are not hostile. We require medical attention. No weapons are to be handled by non-authorized personnel. The ER froze. Not in the theatrical way of a movie, not a sudden silence with everyone turning simultaneously, but in the organic, graduated way that actual shock moves through a crowd. It started at the ambulance bay doors and rippled outward. The paramedic supervisor who had been about to protest. The charge nurse reaching for the phone. The security guard whose hand had moved toward his radio. Dr. Caulfield appeared from somewhere near the central station, tablet still in hand, and took in the scene with the expression of a man whose model of the world was experiencing a significant load error. "What the, sir?" One of the standing men, shaven-headed, with an arm and an improvised brace that had been made from what appeared to be a strip of a jacket and 2 sections of something rigid, looked directly at Caulfield with an expression that was entirely polite and entirely implacable. "Your assistance would be appreciated. The man on the gurney has a penetrating abdominal injury. He has lost significant blood. Time is relevant." Caulfield, to his credit, recovered quickly. "Get me a trauma bay. Who has triage authority here? Let's get—" But the men were not moving toward a trauma bay. The standing ones, the hurt ones, the one between 2 others, they were looking around the room, not at the trauma bays, not at Caulfield, not at the bank of equipment or the orderlies now pressing themselves to one wall. They were looking at the nursing staff. More precisely, they were looking at the nurses as though searching for something specific among them. Moving through faces the way you move through a crowd when you know the person you're looking for is in it somewhere. The man with the improvised arm brace said something under his breath to the one beside him. The other one, blonde, with a cut above his eye that had been field-dressed with deliberate competence, scanned the bay again and said, very quietly, "She's not on the floor." "She's here," the first one said. It was not a question. "Check the bays." Lily Tran, standing at the nurse's station with her hand hovering over an emergency call button, watched this exchange with the particular quality of attention that comes from understanding you are not quite understanding something important. "What do they want?" she murmured to the charge nurse beside her. The charge nurse said nothing. She was watching Marcus Doyle, who had not moved from his position near the doors, and who was also looking. But he was not looking at the nurses' faces. He was looking at Bay 4. Carrie heard them before she saw them. She heard the doors, which was normal. She heard the quality of the silence that followed, which was not. There is a particular silence that a room full of people makes when everyone in it has simultaneously decided to be very quiet, and it has a texture that is distinct from ordinary quiet, the way a held breath is distinct from a resting breath. She had spent years learning to read the acoustics of spaces under stress. Old habit, useful habit. She finished writing the note she was writing, capped the pen, and stepped to the edge of Bay 4's curtain. She saw them. She took in all 6 in approximately the time it takes to exhale. The injuries, the discipline, The way they were holding the room without holding the room, not threatening, not commanding, simply present in a way that made everyone else feel slightly peripheral. And then she saw Marcus Doyle looking at her, not searching anymore. Found. She did not move. She did not speak. She held the curtain edge with 2 fingers and felt something she had spent 4 years carefully building the life. The shift rotations, the bun that was always coming loose, Dennis and his wedding flowers and the steady hands perform a kind of tectonic adjustment. Not collapse, adjust. The man with the improvised arm brace turned. He saw her. He went still in a way that was different from his previous stillness. There, he said, quiet, certain. Lily, from across the station, watched Carrie Weston's face. She had seen Carrie calm. She had seen Carrie efficient. She had seen Carrie do things in trauma bays that had made her own heart seize with vicarious tension, while Carrie's face remained composed as a closed book. This was different. It was not fear. It was not surprise. It was the expression of someone who has been waiting for a specific thing and has now seen it, and must decide, in a very brief window, what to do about that. Carrie stepped out from behind the curtain. She walked toward them, not fast, not slow, with the same economy of movement she brought to everything, except that now there was something underneath it, a density, a quality of compression, like a spring under load. "The man on the gurney," she said, addressing no one in particular, and everyone precisely. "Abdominal, penetrating. How long ago?" 80 minutes, Doyle said. She was already moving to the gurney. She lifted the man's hands. He resisted for 1 second, and then, seeing her face, did not, and assessed what was underneath. "Bay 2, she said to Lily, who had followed without quite deciding to. "Get me a full trauma kit, 2 units O-neg, ultrasound, and Dr. Pearson if he's still in the building." "Caulfield," as Lily started. "Pearson," Carrie said. Nobody argued. Not even Caulfield, who had heard her from 15 feet away and was experiencing the specific discomfort of a man who has just been superseded in a room he believed he commanded. The man on the gurney, she would learn later his name was Reeve. Thomas Reeve, sergeant, 29 years old. 2 tours looked up at her with the unfocused intensity of someone fighting very hard to stay present. "Ma'am," he said. "Don't," she said, not unkindly, just precise. He almost smiled. Then the effort required to do so redirected itself to the effort required to stay conscious, and he closed his eyes. The other men watched her work, the standing ones, the hurt ones. Even Marcus Doyle, who had not moved from near the doors, they watched her the way soldiers watch something they recognize. Not with reverence, with relief. Lily caught this. She logged it. She didn't yet understand it. It took 40 minutes to stabilize Thomas Reeve. In those 40 minutes, Carrie Weston did not stop moving. She ran the trauma bay the way it was supposed to be run, not as the nurse executing a physician's decisions, but as the primary coordinator of a complex, degrading situation with multiple variables and a narrow margin for error. Dr. Pearson, who was a capable surgeon and secure enough in himself to recognize when someone else had the ground truth, followed her directives with the specific deference of a professional, acknowledging a professional. Caulfield stood outside Bay 2 for most of it, watching through the window, holding his tablet with both hands, and not writing anything on it. When it was over, when Reeve was stable, when the bleeding had been controlled and the path towards surgery had been cleared, and the other 5 men had been assessed, and their injuries catalogued and treated in order of severity, Carrie stripped her gloves, disposed of them, and walked to the sink in the corridor to wash her hands. Marcus Doyle was waiting. He had not sat down. He had not, as far as anyone could tell, done anything for 40 minutes except stand near the doors and watch, and now he walked to where she stood at the sink, and stopped at an appropriate distance, and said nothing for a moment. "You didn't need to come all this way," Carrie said. Her eyes were on her hands. The water was running too hot, and she hadn't adjusted it. "The situation requires it." The situation. She shut off the tap, reached for a paper towel. "How many?" 7. This was the forward element. He paused. "We lost Fletcher on the exfil." A silence. Small, contained. "I'm sorry," she said. He knew the margins. Knowing the margins doesn't make it smaller. Doyle looked at her. He had the eyes of someone who has spent decades in rooms where things were decided without the option of revisiting them, and in those eyes was something that was not pleading. He would not plead, but was as close to it as his nature permitted. "We need to talk about what comes next." "I know. Not tonight. But soon." "I know," she said again. She turned from the sink. The corridor was mostly quiet. Now the department had reorganized itself around the incident, the way water reorganizes around a stone, which is to say, it had incorporated it and kept moving. But there were people watching. The charge nurse, 2 orderlies, Lily Tran, who had not gone back to the station and was standing perhaps 20 feet away with the expression of someone who has been watching a film in a language they almost speak. And then, from the other side of the corridor, from the direction of the treated bays, where the other 5 men had been settled, came the sound of boots on linoleum, all 5 of them, moving with the careful, preserved economy of wounded men. The one with the arm brace, the blonde with the dressed cut, the 2 who had helped the 3rd walk in, and one more who had been treated in Bay 3 for a through-and-through on his left shoulder, and was now wearing a sling made from hospital gauze. They stopped. They formed a line, not loose, not casual. A line with the geometry of something practiced, something that meant something. Marcus Doyle stepped to the side. The silence in the corridor was absolute, not the silence of confusion. The silence of ceremony. The man with the arm brace, she recognized him now. His name was Garrett, Sean Garrett. She had treated his shoulder 2 years before this, and 3 years before that brought his good arm up. Precise. Deliberate. Salute. The others followed. One by one, with the slight lag of men working around injuries, each one brought a hand to their brow. Doyle's voice was quiet. Permission to report. Iron Wolf. The ER corridor was silent. Dr. Caulfield, who had come out of Bay 2 and was standing 6 feet to her left, said, in a voice that had lost most of its professional confidence, "What the hell is going on?" Nobody answered him. Carrie Weston looked at the line of men. She looked at their faces, at Garrett's, at the blonde one whose name she hadn't yet placed, at each one in sequence. She looked at Doyle. She said nothing for a moment. Then, at ease, "I'm just a nurse," she said. She said it evenly, without emphasis, the way you say a thing when you are trying to make it true by repeating it. She went back to work. Not in retreat, there was nothing of retreat in it, but with the particular forward motion of someone refusing to let a thing expand by giving it space to expand into. She walked to the next bay, checked on the patient there, a 14-year-old with a lacerated palm from a broken glass, and asked him whether the numbness had spread. It hadn't. She noted this. Lily followed her at a careful distance, the way you follow someone who has demonstrated they are not interested in company, but whose behavior you cannot stop monitoring. The way you handled that man, Lily said carefully. Reeve. The abdominal. Standard penetrating trauma protocol. You called for ONEG before the type was confirmed. His coloring and the injury timeline made the probability of a compatible type-specific window low, Carrie said. It was the right call. Dr. Pearson agreed. That's not standard protocol. It's good protocol. She moved to the next bay. There's a difference. Lily stayed with her. She was trying to assemble something from insufficient pieces. The way you gave orders, she said, more quietly. They listened to you. Those men. They didn't look at Dr. Caulfield. They didn't look at Dr. Pearson. People in extremity look for competence, Carrie said. They tend to find it in whoever is actually helping them. That's not what that was. A beat. No, Carrie said. It wasn't. She picked up a chart, set it back down, picked it up again. But I'm here, and they're going to be treated, and that's what this place is for. In Bay 3, the man with the shoulder, she had his chart now. Ruiz, D. Civilian intake was sitting upright on the gurney watching the doorway. When she came in, his posture changed. Not in any large way. A degree or two of something relaxing. How's the shoulder? She said. Hurts less. The local will wear off in about 4 hours. You'll want the ibuprofen before it does. Yes, ma'am. She checked the dressing. It was clean. Competently applied, she had applied it herself. She adjusted one edge, where it had begun to lift. The man on the gurney, Ruiz said. Reeve. Is he? He's going to surgery in about 30 minutes. The surgeon is good. His odds are solid. Ruiz exhaled slowly. It was the exhale of a man whose accounting of the evening had just come out a little better than he'd feared. We've been trying to find you for 8 months, he said. She kept her attention on the dressing. You had a good cover, he continued. Not accusing. Not anything, really. Just the statement. Quiet shift job. Different name on the intake. No military forwarding address. You were thorough. I learned from people who were good at it. You were one of them. He paused. Still are. She straightened up, looked at him directly for the first time since entering the bay. His face was the face of a man who had served alongside people he respected and then lost track of one of them, and had spent a significant portion of his cognitive resources worrying about what that meant. I'm a nurse, she said. I work the night shift. I go home at 7 in the morning and I sleep and I come back. Okay, he said. That's all I am right now. Okay. A pause. She turned toward the door. But that's not all you ever were, he said. She stopped, didn't turn back, stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame and said, in a voice that was very flat and very even, "No, it isn't." Then she walked out. Her name, before it was Carrie Weston, had been Caroline Harker, Captain Caroline Harker, Special Operations Command. And before that, before the captain, before the designation, a recruiter's assessment from 9 years ago that read, verbatim, in a file she had never seen but had been told about, candidate demonstrates exceptional spatial reasoning, threat perception, and stress response inhibition. Recommend immediate placement in advanced marksmanship program. This one will either be one of the best we've ever trained or she will wash out in the first week. There is no in-between. She had not washed out. She had become Iron Wolf. The designation had come from a training exercise in her second year, when she had held a static position for 41 hours in conditions that were supposed to break candidates cold, wet, sleep-deprived, with a food restriction that the instructors would later admit in private had crossed the line from difficult to genuinely dangerous. She had held position. She had not broken. And at the end of it, when the exercise controller had walked up to where she was still prone in the mud with her rifle still trained on a target that was 3,000 meters away, and had asked her what kept her going, she had thought about it for a moment and then said, "Wolves don't leave their ground." The exercise controller had written it up. The name had spread the way these things do, with the speed and adhesion of something that has found the right surface. Iron Wolf. Her longest confirmed shot was 2,847 meters, taken from a position that 2 other snipers had declared unworkable, in a crosswind that the instruments hadn't fully resolved, against a target that had been the subject of 14 months of intelligence work and 3 failed interdiction attempts. She had taken it in the early morning, when the air was still, and she had not celebrated it, and she had not spoken about it, and when the after-action report cited her by name, she had asked for the citation to be amended to omit the specifics. She was not interested in being a story. Stories had a tendency to precede you into rooms in a way that made the rooms harder to work in. The last operation had been different. It was not a single shot. It was not a clean extraction. It was a joint operation gone wrong in the particular way that joint operations go wrong when the intelligence product is contaminated, and nobody knows it yet. And by the time the contamination becomes apparent, the operational elements are already committed and the margin for adjustment has collapsed to something very thin. She had been the last one to leave, not by choice, by sequence, by the simple arithmetic of who was covering and who was moving, and she had been the one covering, and covering meant staying until the others were through the gap, and the others had included a man named Danny Folds, who was 26 years old and from Boise, Idaho, and who had a photograph in his breast pocket of a woman he was going to marry in 6 months. She had known Danny Folds for 2 years by that point. She knew that he took his coffee with no milk and too much sugar. She knew that he had a way of diffusing tension in a briefing room that was both entirely instinctive and entirely effective, a particular quality of relaxed attention that made other people feel like the situation was more manageable than it actually was. She knew that he was afraid of dogs, specifically dogs over 40 pounds, and that he told this story about himself with a self-deprecating precision that made you like him immediately. She had known, in that scope picture, that he was going to die. That was the decision. Accept his death or accept her own death and the loss of the intelligence, which would mean more deaths downstream. She had done the arithmetic. The arithmetic was clear. Danny Folds had not made it through the gap. She had the shot. She knew she had the shot. It was not a difficult shot by her standards, 600 meters, controlled conditions, a static target in her scope. She had made harder ones in worse light. She had not taken it, because taking it would have flagged her position to the 3 additional personnel she hadn't accounted for, the ones who had come in from the northern approach while her attention was on the primary vector, and taking the shot would have made her dead, and Folds dead both, whereas not taking the shot made Folds dead and herself alive and present, and the only person who had the information about the compromised intelligence product. It was the correct decision. Every after-action review confirmed it. Every experienced operator she had ever spoken to about it, in the oblique way you speak about things like this, had told her the same thing. You made the right call. You saved the mission. You protected the larger objective. She had processed this information. She had processed it, and she had kept processing it, and she had found that what processing it produced was not acceptance, but a kind of internal bleeding that did not stop and did not show and did not respond to anything she tried. 6 months later, she had resigned her commission. She had picked a hospital 2 states from where she'd grown up, enrolled in a nursing program, and spent the next 2 years learning how to do the opposite of what she had been trained to do. Save instead of end. Keep instead of let go. She had been good at this too, which had surprised her and then, on further reflection, had not surprised her at all. The precision required was different, but the underlying discipline was the same. She had thought, when she took the night shift at Mercy General, that she might have finally found the distance she needed. Distance from the operational world, from the specific grammar of violence and precision that she had spoken fluently for the better part of a decade. Distance from the rooms where decisions got made by exhausted people with inadequate information and permanent consequences. Distance, most of all, from herself or from the version of herself that had existed in those rooms. The nursing program had been harder than she'd anticipated and easier than she'd feared. Hard, because the emotional register was different. In her previous life, you learned to compress feeling into function, and here you were asked to hold both simultaneously, to be both efficient and present in a way that required a kind of splitting she had to practice. Easy, because the underlying architecture of the work was familiar: triage, assessment, intervention, outcome. The variables were different. The core logic was the same. She had graduated in the top 5% of her class. She had not told anyone this. She had been wrong. Distance was not a function of geography. Danny Folds had a little sister named Petra, who was now 22 and studying environmental science, and who had never known anything about what happened to her brother except that it had happened in a place that couldn't be named. Carrie knew this because she had found out, without exactly deciding to find out. She had not contacted the family. She had not introduced herself. She had simply needed to know that the small, specific gravity of that life was still present somewhere in the world. She was still paying a debt she could never discharge. This was the thing she carried. This was the thing she had driven 3 states and changed her name and taken on a 12-hour shift rotation to keep contained. And now 6 wounded men were in her ER, and Marcus Doyle was waiting in the corridor with the patience of someone who had given her 4 years and had run out of years to give. At 2:15 the morning, with Thomas Reeve in surgery, and the other 5 men distributed across 3 bays in various stages of treatment and observation, Marcus Doyle found Carrie in the break room. She was drinking coffee she hadn't tasted, standing at the window. The rain had not stopped. "I'm not going to ask you to come back," he said, from the doorway. She turned. "I know you better than to ask you," he continued. He came into the room, helped himself to the coffee machine with the matter-of-fact ease of a man who had spent years operating in other people's environments. "I'm going to tell you what is happening, and you are going to make a decision that is yours to make. That's all." "Then tell me," he told her. The operation that had put 6 men in her ER had been the 3rd attempt. Not the 3rd attempt at the specific objective. The objective had shifted twice before they'd gotten the intelligence product stable enough to act on, but the 3rd attempt at a situation that had been developing for 18 months, that had its roots in a network she had been instrumental in mapping during her last operational year, that had now metastasized into something with a significantly wider footprint. "The man who ran the northern approach," Doyle said. "The one who contaminated the product 4 years ago." Carrie set her coffee down. "He's operational again," Doyle said. "New network, new geography, same methodology. He adapted the approach he learned from what didn't work. He's been careful." He paused. "He's going to stop being careful in approximately 6 weeks, when the window that the current intelligence picture is describing opens. And we need the kind of precision that this requires," Doyle said. "Not a team shot, not a support element, a single point of action from a specific position at a specific time." He did not say her name in either of its versions. He didn't need to. There are 3 people in the program with the profile for this engagement. 2 of them are unavailable. The 3rd has been sitting in this building for 4 years. She was quiet for a moment. "Garrett," she said. "He would have done it if the profile fitted. Garrett's right shoulder has 40% of its original range of motion. He knows it, and you know it, and we both know what that means for the position the engagement requires." She looked at the window. The rain was making patterns on the glass that had no logic to them. Random. Thermodynamic. "There are people in this building who would die tonight if I left," she said. "There are people who will die in 6 weeks if you don't." It was not said as a lever. Doyle was not a man who used levers. He said it the way you say a thing that is simply true. with the flat acknowledgement of someone who has been living with its truth long enough that emotion has been pressed out of it like air from a sealed container. "I need time," she said. "You have until Reeve is out of surgery. After that, we move. That's 3 hours, maybe 4. I know." She turned back to the window. Outside, the rain was doing what rain does, continuing without regard for anything, and she watched it for a moment with the attention of someone who is thinking about something else entirely. "Did you ever consider that I built something here?" she said, not accusatory, genuinely asking. "Yes," Doyle said. "I considered it." He set the coffee down on the counter. "I would not be here at 2 in the morning with 6 wounded men if I had another option. That's not a rhetorical statement. It's a fact." She believed him. Doyle had many qualities, and among the most consistent of them was the quality of not wasting anyone's time with propositions he wasn't prepared to back up. "The people here," she said, "they've relied on me. For 4 years," he said. "They will continue to rely on competent nursing staff after you leave, because this building will continue to function and will hire someone else, and that person will be adequate if not exceptional. The situation I'm describing does not have a replacement." She knew this. She had known it since Ruiz told her they'd been looking for 8 months. She looked at him. He looked back with the patience of a man who has set a thing in motion and understands that the only thing left is to wait for the physics to complete. "Go," she said. "I'll come find you." At Tre. Ferdio. A.M. A 47-year-old man named Gerald Whiting was brought into Bay 1 by 2 paramedics who had worked him for 18 minutes in the rig and whose faces communicated a specific kind of professional pessimism that Carrie had learned to read as accurately as a vital sign. Monitor. Cardiac. Massive. Not his first. She ran the code. She ran it cleanly, the way she ran everything ordered, methodical, her voice clear in the bay, each directive followed by the corresponding action, each assessment communicated to the team in real time. Pearson was still in the building, finishing with Reeve, and so it was Caulfield who came in as the physician, and Caulfield, to his very considerable credit on this particular night, understood what was happening and stayed out of her way. They worked for 22 minutes. At minute 18, she called the rhythm change and adjusted the protocol. At minute 20, she called for a final round and watched the monitor. At minute 22, Gerald Whiting died. The bay went quiet in the particular way that bays go quiet when a code ends without a restoration of sinus rhythm. The machines continued making their sounds. The paramedics began the procedural disengagement that experience makes automatic. Caulfield noted the time. Carrie stood at the foot of the gurney. She had lost patients before. She lost them with the consistency that any competent emergency nurse accumulates over years of working a genuine trauma center in a city with a genuine emergency rate. She had developed the professional mechanism for containing it, the separation of effort from outcome, the understanding that the boundary of her responsibility was the quality of the attempt and not the result. But tonight, in this bay, with the rain still going and the smell of the code still in the air, something crossed a wire. The monitor's flatline tone, a sound she heard multiple times a week, a sound she had long since filed under the category of information rather than event, reached her differently. It arrived the way sound arrives when your defenses are oriented in the wrong direction. It came through the side door. She saw Danny Folds, not as a vision, not as a hallucination, as the pure cognitive experience of a memory that had been waiting with remarkable patience for the right conditions to present itself at full intensity. The scope picture. The crosshair placement, the arithmetic of decision that had taken perhaps 4 seconds in real time and had been running continuously in some background process of her nervous system ever since. 600 meters. The correct call. Every review said so. Every review said so, and she had stood at the foot of enough gurneys and enough bays to understand, at a level beyond argument, that correctness is not the same as clean, that decision-making under impossible conditions produces correct decisions and live consciences both, and that these two things are entirely compatible and entirely insufficient as comfort. She put both hands on the rail of the gurney. She gripped it. After approximately 15 seconds, she released it. "Thank you," she said to the team. Her voice was even. "Good work." She walked out of Bay 1. She walked to the break room, where Marcus Doyle was still drinking terrible coffee, and she stood in the doorway for a moment. He looked up. "I know," she said. Not to him, or not only to him, to whatever internal accounting she had been running for 4 years. "I know what I have to do." He set the coffee down. "There are conditions," she said. "Name them. I'm not leaving until Reeve is stable. I'm not leaving until every man in this building has a proper discharge and a protocol for follow-up care. And when it's done, "You come back," he said, not with certainty, with the acknowledgement that this was a possible outcome and he was not willing to contest it. "To whatever you've built here." A pause. "When it's done, we'll see," she said. He nodded. That was enough. Thomas Reeve came out of surgery at 4:52 a.m. The surgeon, Dr. Pearson, who was excellent and who had by this point absorbed a significant amount of the evening's ambient strangeness and simply incorporated it into his operational picture, found Carrie in the corridor outside the recovery suite and gave her the update with the professional directness of one competent person briefing another. Clean repair, stable vitals, 24-hour monitoring indicated, but prognosis was good. "Thank you," she said. "You ran a good stabilization," he said. "Better than good. Whatever you did in that bay in the first 40 minutes added a significant margin to what I had to work with." She acknowledged this with a nod that wasn't dismissive and wasn't proud, just accurate. Then she went to check on the others. She went bay to bay with the systematic attention of someone completing a list. Garrett's arm, dressed, stable, the improvised brace replaced with a proper one. The blonde one, his name was Vickers. She'd gotten it from the intake form he'd filled out with his left hand, because his right was immobilized, had a mild concussion added to the laceration, and needed observation for another 4 hours. The others were ambulatory, medicated where necessary, and possessed of the particular resilience of men who had endured worse. She updated each chart with the precision she brought to everything. No shorthand, no abbreviation. If someone read these charts tomorrow, they would have everything they needed. In Bay 3, Ruiz was asleep. She stood in the doorway for a moment and watched him breathe. He had told her they'd been looking for 8 months. She wondered what that search had looked like from the outside, whether they had come close before tonight or whether the hospital's institutional obscurity had provided more cover than she'd calculated. She filed the question without an answer. It didn't change anything. At 5:30 a.m., she went back to the locker room. She sat on the bench with her hands in her lap for a while. She was aware of the sounds of the ER through the wall diminished now, the overnight lull before the early morning surge, and aware of the rain, which had finally stopped. She opened her locker. Her scrubs, her bag, her car keys, a photograph she kept face down on the upper shelf. She picked up the photograph, turned it over. A field. Somewhere cold. 4 people in operational gear, all of them grinning with the specific absurdity of people who have just done something they knew was extremely dangerous and have made it out the other side. She was on the right. Garrett was to her left. Between them, grinning the widest Danny Folds, who would be dead 14 months after the picture was taken. She looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she put it in her bag instead of back on the shelf. She was not sure exactly what that meant. She was willing to find out. She changed, not into her street clothes. She borrowed a set of civilian tactical gear from the bag that Doyle had left for her outside the locker room door, because of course he had anticipated this, and of course he had prepared for it, and she dressed with the economy of long practice, each piece going where it was supposed to go without the need for thought. When she walked back out into the corridor, the building was quiet. Lily was there. She was standing near the nurse's station in the particular posture of someone who has been waiting and has been trying not to look like they've been waiting. And when she saw Carrie, she straightened up and opened her mouth and then closed it again. Carrie stopped in front of her. "The Vickers concussion needs 4 more hours of observation. Make sure the neurocheck is documented every 30 minutes, not hourly. Reeves' fluid levels will want watching when he comes out of the recovery sedation. Pearson has the parameters in the chart, but page him if anything looks off." "Okay," Lily said. And then, "Where are you going?" A pause. "Somewhere I should have gone before," Carrie said. "Or somewhere I should have been allowed to leave. I'm not entirely sure which." "Will you come back?" Carrie looked at the department, the lights, the bays, the station, with its charts and its organized chaos and its continuous low hum of need and response. She had built something here, not the career, something more specific than that. A practice of repair that was also, she now understood, a practice of penance. And she was not sure penance was what it had started as, but she was also not sure it was only penance. "I think so," she said. "Yes." She walked toward the ambulance bay. Marcus Doyle was waiting with 4 of the men, the ambulatory ones, the ones cleared to move. Garrett was with them, his arm in its proper brace. Ruiz. Vickers would stay for observation as she'd directed. She stopped in front of Doyle. "Conditions?" he said. "Same as stated. All of it." "Agreed." She looked at the men. They looked back. No ceremony this time. Just the recognition between people who have operated together, the specific, compressed acknowledgement of shared experience that has no social equivalent and requires no performance. Garrett caught her eye. He had the look of a man who had spent 8 months operating at reduced capacity and had developed a specific way of sitting with that reduction, not with bitterness, she was glad to see, but with the patience of someone who understood his own window. His arm would always be what it was. He had made his peace with this. She gave him a nod that covered a lot of ground. He returned it in kind. "All right," she said. Her voice was different now, not colder, more precise, more settled, the way a tool sounds when it is being used for what it was made for. "Let's go through the picture. What are we working with?" Doyle began. She listened with her arms folded and her eyes clear, and her whole attention operating at the frequency it had been designed for. The man she had built into Carrie Weston, the invisible nurse, the steady hands, the bun coming loose, the 4 years of bay rotations, that person did not vanish. She was present. She was real. But underneath her, or alongside her, standing in the same space without contradiction, was someone else. Someone who had been very patient. Iron Wolf. Still here. Still reporting. The ambulance bay was gray in the pre-dawn, the asphalt still wet from the rain, the air carrying the particular smell of a city after water clean and slightly sharp, like something had been briefly clarified. The vehicle was unmarked. Of course it was. Garrett held the rear door while she went through the final status update on her phone, the discharge notes, the care instructions she had written for each of the 5 men, the page she had left for the oncoming day shift charge nurse with her personal number attached. She finished, pocketed the phone, and stood for a moment. Lily Tran was in the ambulance bay doorway. She had followed not all the way, not in pursuit, but just to the doorway, the way you stand at the edge of a territory that isn't yours. "Who are you?" Lily said. "Really?" It was the question Carrie had been asked before, in various forms, by people who could sense that the surface didn't match the depth. She had answered it differently each time, depending on what the person seemed to need. This time she answered it the way it deserved to be answered. "Someone who learned how to save lives after taking too many," she said. Lily absorbed this. She did not look frightened, which Carrie noted, and was grateful for. She looked like someone revising a map. "Will you be okay?" Lily said. A pause that was not a hesitation but a genuine moment of consideration. "I think that depends on what you mean by okay," Carrie said. "But yes, in the ways that count." She got into the vehicle. Doyle was in the front. Garrett sat across from her. Outside, the city was beginning to lighten at the edges, that gray to blue transition that happens before any actual warmth arrives, when the darkness is retreating but the day hasn't committed yet. She sat with her hands on her knees, her back straight, her breathing even. Garrett watched her with the peripheral attention of someone who has decided to give her whatever space she requires. The city moved past the windows. She had driven these streets for 4 years, had learned the rhythm of the neighborhood around Mercy General, the late-night bodega on 5th, the laundromat on Mercer, that ran until 2 a.m., the particular intersection where the light always ran long. She noted these things the way she noted everything, recording without needing the record to mean anything beyond itself. In her bag, the photograph. Danny Folds grinning in a cold field. She would carry it from here forward, not as penance, not as punishment, as what it actually was. Evidence that a person existed, that his existence mattered, that the account was not closed simply because the decision had been correct. There was no resolution for that. She had stopped looking for one. What existed instead was the carrying, the continuing choice to carry it, which was different from being crushed by it. She thought about Gerald Whiting, who had died in Bay 1 at 3:52 a.m., with people doing their best for him. She thought about Reeve, currently in recovery with stable vitals and a prognosis that Pearson called solid. She thought about Lily Tran, who had watched everything with those careful eyes, and had filed it all, and had asked 2 questions, and had received 2 honest answers. She thought about what it meant to be built for something, whether being built for something was a gift or a sentence, or whether that distinction was less meaningful than the question of what you did with the building. She had tried distance. She had tried the opposite life. She had tried to become someone whose hands were instruments of repair rather than instruments of ending. And she had found over 4 years of night shifts, over countless bays and charts and codes and the specific exhaustion of caring about strangers on a rotating schedule, that she had in fact become that person. And also still the other one. Both true. Both present, not in conflict so much as in negotiation, a long, ongoing, imperfect negotiation that had no end date and required no resolution, only the willingness to keep having it. The vehicle reached the edge of the city. The grid gave way to highway. She allowed herself, in the privacy of her own thoughts, a single moment of something like grief for the life she was stepping away from. Not its entirety, she would return to it. She genuinely believed this, but for the specific morning that was ending, for the shift that had started with Dennis talking about wedding flowers and ended with her in a vehicle heading north in borrowed tactical gear. She had saved 4 people tonight. Definitively, not hypothetically, 4 people who would wake up in hospital beds this morning, whose continued existence was in part a function of her specific competence. This was not nothing. She had learned, over 4 years, that it was in fact something substantial, something that accumulated in a way that was different from but not inferior to the kind of outcome her previous work had produced. She would carry all of it, the shot not taken and the codes run and the 4A.M decisions and the steady hands. She would carry Danny Folds in a cold field, grinning. She would carry Gerald Whiting dying at 3:52 a.m., with people doing their best. She would carry Lily Tran standing in the ambulance bay doorway, asking a question that deserved an honest answer. None of it resolved. None of it was supposed to. 6 weeks, she said. Approximately, Doyle said from the front. And after, you have my word. She nodded, looked out the window. The gray was shifting. Behind them, in Bay 12 at Mercy General, the ID badge she had left on the nurse's station Weston C. RN, the photograph slightly old. The laminate with one edge beginning to peel sat on the laminate countertop. Lily found it an hour later, when the day shift was coming in and the night was officially over. She stood there holding it, looking at the photograph on the badge, that unremarkable, composed face, the light brown hair caught in a slightly formal angle, and she thought about everything she had filed over 8 months and everything she had seen in the last 6 hours and what it amounted to. She put the badge in her pocket. She didn't know why exactly. It felt like the right kind of keeping. The helicopter on the roof had started up. Respiratory transfer, probably she could tell from the sound now, the particular rotor frequency of the hospital's contracted service. It lifted off. She watched it go, out the window above the ambulance bay, until it was a sound, and then a faint impression, and then nothing. Somewhere on the highway heading north, Iron Wolf was going back to work. She had never, in any version of herself, been just a nurse. She had never been just anything at all. The ID badge on the nurse's station caught the first gray light coming through the ambulance bay windows. A laminated square. A name. A photograph of a woman looking at the camera with the composed, slightly distant expression of someone who has learned to present a surface and keep the depths for themselves. It would stay on that counter until Lily picked it up. And then it would stay in Lily's pocket. And then, eventually, it would become one of those objects that a person keeps without quite being able to explain why, the kind of object that carries the compressed weight of a story you only half understand but cannot bring yourself to let go of. Outside, the sky continued its slow negotiation with the light.